It seems like a lot of folks want to be famous these days. They want to be famous for being influencers, for having a lot of followers. It seems sometimes just being famous for being famous. Sounds pretty nice. We're going to have a short and sweet episode today. We're going to talk about the number one thing that's critical for you to do in your estate planning so that you don't end up famous years later for a reason you'd rather not be famous. Welcome to Let's Talk Estate Planning, the podcast all about estate planning issues and options. My name is Jim Miskell, and I've been practicing law in the state of Georgia for more than 30 years. Almost half of that time I've dedicated exclusively to estate planning, elder law, and probate in my practice. And I love talking about estate planning because it's so important to families, because it can really make a difference in making sure that when grief and crisis strike, your family's not running around town trying to figure things out, not stuck at the courthouse, but they're spending time together, which is where family should be. So, like I said, we're going to keep it short and sweet today. We're going to talk about healthcare directives and how important it is to make sure you've got a healthcare directive. If you tuned into our 3 legs of the stool episode, that's the 3 legs of the basic stool of estate planning. That was one of the legs, is the healthcare directive. So we're going to sort of finish that up today, talking about the basics there. Just going to hit it short and sweet. I got a couple stories for you that I think will really bring the point home and really motivate you to make sure that this is in place for your family, because it's critically important. Before I get to those stories, though, here's my disclaimer. The podcast is for education and entertainment. I find estate planning very entertaining. I hope you do. Whether you do or not, this is not legal advice. Legal advice is when you sit across the desk from an attorney and she gets to ask you questions to make sure that what you've got in place fits your needs. That's what I do when I meet with my clients, and that's the right next step for you. Don't do your planning just based on what I've said in a podcast. It's good information. It should get you on the way to getting these things resolved. But you really do need legal advice about your specific situation. And this is a podcast for information and education only, not legal advice. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about Terri Schiavo, because that's who I was referring to at the opening of the episode. She ended up with traumatic brain injury in about 1990. I have been doing estate planning presentations to rooms full of people since about 2008 or 2009. I started out with just lunch and learns to, human resources type events and Rotary lunches and those sorts of things. And I do estate planning workshops about twice a month. Still, every room I've been in to do one of those presentations, I believe without fail, I've asked if anybody recognizes the name Terri Schiavo. I have never gotten a no response out of that. Every time I've ever asked that in these, 17, 18 years now of doing this, folks raise their hand because they recognize the name Terri Schiavo. She ended up with a traumatic brain injury in 1990 and was diagnosed to be in what was referred to as a persistent vegetative state. To make a very long story really short, her husband said that she wouldn't want to continue on and that they should withdraw treatment. And her family, her birth family, objected to that, said that's not what Terri's values were and the treatment should be continued. This all came to a head for only one reason, and that's because although Terri and her husband had talked about these things, they didn't do any documentation of that. So there wasn't any document appointing him her healthcare proxy or giving him healthcare power of attorney. And there was no living will directing that if she became in a persistent vegetative state, what were her treatment preferences? Based on that, they ended up at the courthouse. And before all was said and done, there was a state court proceeding. Eventually, there were federal court proceedings. The president at the time expressed an opinion. The Pope had an opinion. The General Assembly of Florida had an opinion. Everyone had an opinion. Since that time, there have been books. Both sides have written a book. Other books have been written. People magazine, Lifetime movies, things like that have kept Terri's name in the public eye. And again, it comes down to just one simple thing, is that there was not a proper document in place that would have taken the pressure off the whole situation, because my experience has strongly been with my families that I've been working with that they will follow your wishes. You've just got to let them know what they are. You've got to let them know what they are. I had one family where I had done planning for mom and dad. Mom and dad were actually in the in-law suite at their daughter's home. And her daughter here, Jill, when she got married, moved to Atlanta. Her folks followed her here, and their health wasn't very good. It was going downhill. They were elderly. And mom ended up having an episode where she was in the hospital and gravely ill, and she wasn't going to survive. The prognosis was not good, so they called, and their brother flew in from Oklahoma. And when he got here, he arrived on the scene at the hospital and was trying to figure out what was going on, and he saw how bad off mom was. And he started asking his sister, why wasn't more being done? The prognosis didn't seem good, but they should be doing more. Why wasn't she on machines? Why weren't these things being done? He started to get a little agitated and raise Cain with the doctors. She was able to sort of pull him aside and say, look, here's the estate planning that our folks did. And here's the healthcare directive. In Georgia, it's called a healthcare directive. In other states, you might see it as a healthcare proxy, a living will. Called different things, but essentially in Georgia, it's the healthcare directive. Here's mom's healthcare directive, and she's did this within the last 2 years, and here's where she named me as the agent for, and if I can't do it, brother, it's you. And beyond that, here's where she said, look, if I'm gravely ill, if I'm in a terminal condition, my death is going to occur in a short period of time. It was her wish that she be kept comfortable, but the treatment be withdrawn. Understanding that, being able to see that, and see that his mom had taken time to think about the issues, execute this document, he could see her signature on it. It diffused that situation emotionally. And he and his sister were able to communicate. They were able to spend time together at mom's bedside instead of fighting, because he trusted his mom to make the decision. But he was going to fight for whatever his mom wanted. And before he knew what it was, he was going to fight to make sure she was kept alive as long as possible. So I tell you that story just to say that without a healthcare directive, you can end up with a situation where kids are looking at each other in the hospital hallway and saying, what would she want? What would he want? And kids can start to fight at that point in time. And they don't fight because there's a good kid and a bad kid. They fight because they've had different conversations with their parents. So don't put your kids in this situation. Make sure you get a healthcare directive that's properly executed that says, look, if I'm gravely ill, this is what I want you to do. And I don't want you to lose sleep over this. I want you to know that what you're doing is what I would want. And so, like I said, this is a short and sweet episode. I just want to cover the basics today and let you know that I've seen these things work and make a big difference. And I've seen them diffuse emotions, and I've filled out the healthcare instructions every possible way with clients. It's such a unique and individual expression that it's really different for everybody. But getting these things in place, properly executed, where your family can find them, makes the difference between getting things the way you want them to go and ending up being famous like Terry Schiavo. And nobody wants to be famous that way. You know, frankly, I don't like talking about her case very much because I feel like it's none of my business. It's none of your business. That was really family business. And with a properly executed healthcare directive, it stays the business of your family and not anybody else's. So making sure you've got one is important. You may say, well, I haven't heard of that. What's a healthcare directive? In my state, it's a healthcare proxy. I've heard of that, or a durable healthcare power of attorney. It can be any number of things. Georgia, we just happen to call it an advanced directive for healthcare. Some states call it a healthcare proxy that designates your representative, just like the Georgia document, or some states call it a durable power of attorney for healthcare, a durable healthcare power of attorney. It doesn't matter really what it's called. What's important is that you've appointed an agent to speak for you when you're not able to. And this is when things are non-critical even. If you're just knocked out from a wreck or you can't make good decisions, that allows your people to make decisions about whether or not to get a second opinion, whether or not to get to a different hospital, whether or not to go ahead and do surgery, those sorts of things, not critical, not end-of-life things, but that's designation of your healthcare agent. What you're going to find really important there is designating somebody that you trust, somebody that knows your values, and nominating successive agents as well. Appointing, if my number one can't do it, who's the number two? Why? Because you're going to end up in the car with your number one pretty often. That's the case for most people. So you want a backup. I think you should have 2 or 3 backups, honestly. I see a lot of documents where there aren't enough backups. Life happens, and you want to make sure that your documents are prepared for contingency. So that's the first part of the document, is designating an agent who you trust, who knows you well, who can make good decisions and exercise good judgment without being overwhelmed. And it's important to take into consideration the character of the folks you've got to work with. What do I mean by that? I mean, you may have a daughter who's fantastic with numbers, black and white. You want her to do the finances all day long, but she gets emotionally overwhelmed easily, or she's queasy in the hospital. She's not a good number one, although she may be great for your power of attorney. She's probably not a good number one for your healthcare directive. So it's important to take into the consideration the abilities of the folks that you've got to work with. The second piece of that document is what in the past has been, in Georgia, was called the living will. That's a very common way to refer to it. And so it may be part of a healthcare directive like it is in Georgia. You may find it as a standalone document. But the living will is where you say, look, if I'm gravely ill in this situation, if doctors agree that this is the situation, and I want to be clear that these documents pretty uniformly say this is not a casual determination. The Georgia document, for example, says 2 doctors must be willing to agree that that's how ill I am, that's how bad off I am, and put it in writing. Those 2 doctors must put it in writing before you get to my end-of-life instructions. So it's not a casual thing. So it's a formal process, and then indicate what your wishes are there. And folks all the time say, well, how do I know? There's this detail or that detail. It's impossible to predict every possible combination of facts that may occur. What you're really after is giving your family some guidance and letting them know what your priorities are, what your values are, so that when those decisions come to be made, they can rely on the fact that they understand where you're at on these ideas. So those are the 2 primary pieces, is nominating, appointing your agent, and giving them good instructions. Another piece that shouldn't be overlooked is a HIPAA waiver. Sometimes you'll see that as a standalone document. The Health Insurance Portability and Privacy Act protects our confidential information and really limits, and if you've been to the dentist or the doctor or the eye doctor or anybody, you've seen this language, and this is the idea that healthcare providers can't just give your information to anybody. When you appoint a healthcare agent, that really should be part of it, is the HIPAA waiver, making sure that they've got authority to see all that. But the most important thing is making sure you get it done so that your family's not suffering about what the decision should be, about what you would do if you were able to speak to them at that point in time. So one thing you need to do to make sure that you're not famous for the wrong reasons is make sure that you've got a healthcare document in place that empowers agents that you trust and gives them end-of-life instructions so that your family isn't wondering and isn't fighting. You don't want to be famous for the wrong reasons. If you'd like to know more about these and other estate planning documents, check out my website, letstalkestateplanning.com. There's a lot of information there. I've got a ton of blog posts and resources that you can see. If you are in the Atlanta area, I'd like to invite you to come to one of our in-person workshops. We do 1 or 2 a month, and I would love to see you there. There's no cost to attend. It's great information, and you can actually ask questions in real time there. Of course, general questions. When it comes to specific questions about various families, the right place for you to ask those questions is in a direct consultation with an estate planning professional, an attorney that's got some experience doing those things. And if you'd like more information, please contact us through the website, get in touch with the office, and we'll address that. And we'll get you the information. In future episodes, we'll be getting away from the basics and talk more about the human side of it, what it takes to get over the hump emotionally getting this stuff done, how to talk to other family members about addressing these issues, how to talk to loved ones, and how to motivate perhaps loved ones that are beginning to have memory issues and health issues to get this done. A lot of times leading by example is the best way to get folks going. folks don't want to give up their independence, and how to really get across the point that actually planning extends your independence rather than giving it away. So I really appreciate your time today. If you'd like to know more about just the basics, go back and check out that 3 Legs of the Stool episode. My name is Jim Miskela, and it's been great spending some time with you. Let's Talk Estate Planning, the podcast that talks about estate planning issues and options so that my dream, we can achieve it. Let's make sure everybody's got their estate planning in place so that families aren't more unhappy than they need to be when grief and crisis strikes. Stay well, take care of each other, and I look forward to seeing you on a future podcast. Take care.